Welcome to our strategy huddle on people accountability, which was edited from a longer webinar.
Out my organization, and I certainly think this topic is a really big one. It goes very much into, and you've heard me talk a lot about this, and passion I have around the organizational development component of strategic planning and the execution thereof. So I'm going to touch on just a couple of things, and I'd like to just point out that I'm sure there are a lot of folks on the line today that could add a lot more to this, and I would just love to hear your thoughts. And if again, as noted when I started, please do add what's working for you in your chat box, or in the chat box, excuse me, so we can share. But let's just walk through a couple of things that I hope will be helpful as you're thinking about how to drive accountability throughout your organization. And again, as it relates to executing against strategy, that's why we're talking about this. So really liked this study, and we just repurposed this, and it looks obviously like that. I wanted to give credit to this and also note where you can find it. Great study by HBR, and the name of it will be on the next slide, but it was really entitled Organizational Effectiveness, What Drives Action, and there was a survey, of course, that they did, a study, and you can take the same survey. It's located on the page, and I'll show you that in just a second. But anyways, basically they came out of this study with 4 things that drive action. And that's, of course, what we're looking for in accountability. And this is based on, you can say, a relative strength. So what's the thing that's going to have the best impact on driving action, or what do people need the most in order to make action happen? So information was the biggest one, followed by decision rights, or the right to make the decisions that I need to make in order to take action on whatever I'm supposed to be taking action on. Motivators were quite a bit lower, and then structure, organizational structure, right underneath that. So let's look at the next slide, and we can see those broken out a little bit more. There was obviously questions that were related, each of those 4 buckets, if you will, the building blocks, and you can kind of see the key on the bottom of this image is the same 4 that we looked at on the previous slide. And so broken out a little, there's the top 7 traits, and so fundamental traits to organizational effectiveness was the name of the article, and you can see the HBR reference there for June 08. We just put the first 7 up here. There are 10 other ones that are lower, but just to illustrate the point for today, the top 7 are based on folks having the right information and having the ability to make the decisions in order to take action. And so I think that it's interesting to look at this, because you could even sort of just apply this to your organization right now to say, do my people have the right information and the decision rights to take action on the things that I'm asking them to be accountable for? So the first one, and the strength index is far and above the others, as you can see, is that everyone has a good idea of the decisions and actions for which he or she is responsible. And I just think that is such a big one as it relates to driving accountability. What am I specifically responsible for doing, and how am I supposed to make that happen? And then I think the others that are on here too, you can see them are related to information flowing, and we all know that information flow through organizations, no matter what the size, is always a challenge. So really looking at those 2 things and thinking about, are we setting our people up for success? Do they know what they're supposed to be taking action on, and do they have the authority to take action on what they're supposed to be doing, and do they have the information to do so? So those 2 things, I think, are really great takeaways as it relates to driving accountability. Some other stuff, though, that I wanted to share and kind of relate it back to those 4 different traits. And these are just kind of different things that I picked up over the years. Some of them are obvious, and some of them are maybe not so obvious. So one thing is certainly one of the things that has to happen in order for people to be accountable and take action on their goals is having the capacity to do so. And really think that it's important to kind of look at the what are on people's plates. And again, this is sort of falls into management role quite a bit, and depending upon the size of the organization, this can be a bit of a hard task. But oftentimes, and we know this with strategic plans and business plans and just planning in general, we're just trying to put more stuff on top of people's plates, and their plates are already full. And especially right now, we know that everyone's asked to do more with less people and less resources. And so do we really have the capacity to get done what we're being asked to get done? And I know there's a lot of other things that go into that, but one really quick back of the napkin thing that we do a lot is just have folks, and that's what this is illustrating on the slide, have folks draw a chart and break down where they're spending their time in broad buckets. And if we're asking for people to add something onto their plate, then we need to be identifying what needs to go away in order to put something else in its plate. And that, of course, assumes that they're at full capacity. So this particular example here was based on wanting an individual to absorb another action, another initiative within the organization, and the decision was, well, if this individual is going to take on a big strategic initiative, then perhaps one of their clients that they were supporting and they were managing would need to go to somebody else. And that's an example of being pretty thorough and rigorous about helping people set them up for success, such that they can actually they can get done what they're supposed to get done. And that, of course, would help us in making sure that they're feeling accountable for what they're supposed to be responsible for delivering to the business. Another idea, kind of looking at the next slide, is, and this is just a different take on it, is connecting with the why. And Ryan, if we could go to the next slide, please. So connecting with the why. So if we kind of look back if we think back for a second to where I started from that study about what drives action, having the right information, having the ability to make the right decisions, being motivated or having the right motivators, and then, of course, structure, that the organizational structure is correct. This is kind of around the non-monetary motivators, and I think this becomes more and more important about why are we doing what we're doing? Why do we get up every day to come to work and cross off things on our task list? And so I thought this was a pretty interesting question for leaders. Would you be passionate about what would you be passionate about doing for 10 years, even if you did not make a dime? Certainly, that's a tough question, but I thought that that cuts to the core a little bit about the why motivator, the purpose motivator in all of us. And then for our staff, what is the larger vision and greater purpose in your work beyond money or profit? And, it's really up to us as leaders or external, if you're an external consultant that's on the line today, coaching through the strategic planning process, that larger vision, and we know this, but that larger vision and a really clear mission helps people connect with the bigger why and why the particular thing they're being asked to do, again, whatever metric they're supposed to drive, whatever goal they're responsible for, that there's a greater motivator about what's important about making that thing happen, because we're connected with a larger vision and a larger thing that we're trying to accomplish. And just last week, we had a speaker come into Reno, and our whole staff to hear the CEO of Tom's Shoes speak. And the business model, which you've probably heard about Tom's Shoes, is that if you when they sell a pair of shoes, they give a pair of shoes away. And this is sort of a really cool and simplistic model around corporate responsibility. But what's interesting about that is he has a staff of people who are connected with a much larger purpose and a much larger vision about putting shoes on kids in countries where they can't afford shoes, obviously. So not that and certainly I would advocate that we all figure out what our corporate social responsibility initiatives are, but more importantly is we've created a bigger why for driving results, and I think that's a really powerful thing as it relates to driving accountability. So let's look at something a little bit more specific then. So if we're talking about kind of back end, I'm just going to keep reconnecting with where we started with our stats: information, decision, motivation, and structure. Looking again at I call this making strategy personal, but that very first thing we looked at with the one trait, the organizational effectiveness trait, is that people know what they're supposed to do. So that sounds pretty obvious, but we work with a lot of organizations, and I'm sure you may reflect this in your mind as well, is we put a plan together, we put goals on paper, we put actions down, and we come back around and look at it, and we have no idea what we're supposed to do to drive the initiative or drive the goal or the action, or it doesn't make sense, or we don't understand who's doing it and how it breaks down. And so this is just an example of a very simple action plan. Some names are crossed out. That's why there's some black boxes on there, but it's something that our system produces as an action plan by person, but obviously you can do that in Excel as well, or however you're doing it, but that you as an individual contributor have a list of goals and actions that are squarely 100% your responsibility, that you have primary accountability for. So just really making strategy personal. And the next item then, so that's just that one point, is making sure that everybody has a task list, and that item underneath there is an action plan at the department level. So from a manager perspective, of course, that we are managing and are clear about everybody's role and responsibility and accountability for the pieces that drive perhaps department level plans. The next and the last thing that I wanted to share was just around the concept of rewards. So that was the motivator piece. That was what we started with on our 4 breakdowns. So we all know that rewards are perhaps a little bit hard to come by right now, especially in this economy. So linking and being really clear about how accomplishing our goals and the associated targets, and this is just a performance review sheet that we use, but how the delivering on those targets are linked to perhaps they're monetary rewards, perhaps they're not monetary rewards. And being pretty blunt, in today's economy, I know a lot of people, depending upon where you live, are pretty happy to have jobs. So that in and of itself is a big reward. But certainly, if we think back to the data that I put up initially, that motivator piece was a little bit not as big as information and the decisions rights piece. So maybe the monetary rewards thing isn't really going to happen this year. But if we're driving motivation around the bigger why, if we're also thinking about how to connect it with rewards that might not be monetary, but perhaps around, one of our clients did a trip on Lake Tahoe when everybody hit some big number that they were driving towards. There's also, time off, which does have, of course, monetary implications. But I think there's a lot of things we can think about that are different than just linking to dollars, but being really, really clear about these are my goals. And there's probably arguably too many goals on this particular performance review, and that we would argue that. But that we're really clear about the 4 or 5 or 6 things that we're responsible for driving and what the monetary or the non-monetary or just the excitement of being part of something bigger is associated with. So just some thoughts on linking goals to motivators and rewards. So kind of wrapping it up then, just actions related to how do we drive accountability through the organization. So the big things that stick out for me is that everybody understands the underlying why. And I think that this sounds really simple, and then I also think by the same token it can be much harder than that. And so I shared my one example with the Tom's shoes, and that's great and obvious. And we're working with another organization right now where we thought we did a really good job with articulating the mission, and we thought we did a really good job casting a strong vision about where the leadership team is trying to take the organization. And then, when you dig deeper through the ranks and you start rolling it out, you see maybe some things that pop up where perhaps the mission and vision aren't landing as strongly with people, and that why isn't connecting as largely. And so, of course, one way to get around that is in engaging folks in the process ahead of time before you roll out a mission and vision statement. And we know that works sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. But pushing really hard on getting to a place where the bigger vision is cast, the bigger mission is really clear, I think is something that takes time, and it takes leadership commitment to actually make the why connect with people in a very deep way. So being really clear about each person has their own understands what they're accountable for. So primary accountability for driving what goals and what metrics, and really the ability to do so. I think that's important. One thing I always think about, and I'm sure you all can share with this as well, is people procrastinate or people don't get things done because, one, they don't know how to do it. They honestly to goodness do not have the skills to do it. The second reason that people procrastinate is they don't have the tools to do it. They don't have the right tools, whether it's software or whatever it might be. And the third thing is that they just don't want to, and of course that's a managerial issue. But I think it's kind of an interesting thing to think about as it relates to accountability, that we're actually setting people up to be successful. We're giving them primary accountability for things that they can actually accomplish, and they have the decision-making ability to do so. That kind of leads over into my last point there, the right time and the resources, information to accomplish their goals. So I shared that in the beginning as well, and then the right rewards in place. And, one thing that I always like to remind myself of, and we've probably heard this, you probably heard this before as well, is that the biggest motivator for people and the biggest reward for people is just being appreciated in their job.